So we are delighted to have today with us in our Bar-Ilan University Vision Science Seminar, Professor Linda Smith from Indiana University, Bloomington. Professor Smith received her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and immediately joined the faculty at Indiana University. Today, she's a distinguished professor at Indiana University, Bloomington, and leads the Cognitive Development Lab in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. She's an internationally recognized leader in cognitive science and cognitive development. She has supervised dozens of graduate students and postdocs, many of whom are now in academic positions at leading universities and research institutions in the US and across the world. She has won dozens of awards and honors, including the David E. Rumelhart Prize for Theoretical Contributions to Cognitive Science, the American Psychological Association Award for Distinguished Scientific Contributions, the William James Fellow Award from the American Psychological Society, the Norman Anderson Lifetime Achievement Award, and the Kafka Medal. She's an elected member of both the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Science. She has served on multiple journal editorial boards and is now a section editor at PNAS. She has hundreds of publications, and many of them have thousands and hundreds of citations. Overall, she has almost 45,000 citations and an H-index of 99, according to Google Scholar. She has been invited to hundreds of talks and colloquia across the world. Her work has been continuously funded by the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health. Taking a complex systems perspective, she seeks to understand the interdependencies among perceptual, motor, and cognitive developments during the first 3 years of postnatal life. Using wearable sensors, including head-mounted cameras, she studies how the young learner's own behavior creates the statistical structure of the learning environments, with a current focus on developmentally changing visual statistics at the scale of everyday life and the role in motor, perceptual, and language development. The work has led to novel insights extended through collaborations in artificial intelligence and education. The work also motivates her current efforts on defining and promoting a precision or individualized developmental science, one that determines the multiple causes and interacting factors that create children's individual developmental pathways. So without further ado, I am delighted to welcome you, Linda, to our seminar to hear about your exciting research. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much for that really very generous introduction. And I am, as I said earlier to Sharon, I am very happy to be here because my work has taken me to vision and I'm a novice in it, okay? And so I definitely want more from you. Hopefully I'll give a little out, but you'll give some back, okay? All right, so let me begin. All right, so here we are. So, much of the knowledge available in the world is latent. It's unrealized without some direct physical action on the world by the learner. I think this fact is far more consequential, transformative, and radical for how we think about the development of brain and mind than we might have thought, okay? So throughout my career, I have been most interested in how young children, infants, break into language. And what I've learned in trying to study that is that it is children's own behavior that releases the information from their world. And that the study of how their own behavior releases information from the world has taken me to where I am now, trying to study the development of experience itself. Whoops, go back one. So my overarching goal of my endeavor at the moment is to understand the dynamics of self-generated data streams at the sensory motor level and how they impact other levels of analysis. And the big idea as to why this is important is it's become clear that evolution, development, and the real-time processes of behavior jointly conspire both to change the brain, make learning and development, and the statistics of experience, so that neural development or learning at the cognitive level and experience and behavior all co-develop. They are tied, okay? Not a causal direction, just completely tied, each determining the other. So today's talk, what I want to do is, protect myself a little bit, tell you where I began, how I went from word learning to self-generated visual experiences. Then I'll talk about the sort of main event here, thinking about, we haven't done anywhere near, there's a lot we don't know, but thinking about how to study or the implications of a curriculum of visual experience. And then in the last little bit of the talk, I'll do a preview of some new work where we look at how geography and culture influences the self-generated first-person visual experiences as well. All right, so the data. Once I decided that I needed to understand the structure of experience, you realize quickly that the only experience that matters is not the experience I might look out in the world that sees, but the experience that actually hits the sensors of the developing child. So we do a great deal of work with wearable sensors, and we have multiple levels at which we do this, okay? Beginning all this in 2008 now. So one level is the multi-sensory. We bring babies in the lab, they have on head-mounted eye trackers, they have wearable sensors on the head and hands. We now have autonomic vests on them. This is like, they're wired up. It's natural. We do naturalistic behavior, not discrete trial, but they are wired up and they're in the lab, okay? But it is real-time, multi-sensory behavior, dense time streams of real-time behavior. We also do studies in the lab. I'll talk maybe a little bit about this, not much today, where we bring children in, and now they only wear head cameras and microphones, so that it's much freer for them to move about and do whatever they want to do. So it is also naturalistic, cluttered, free-flowing, and in the lab. So some bit of control. And then we also put head cameras on babies in the home with no experimenters present. We train the parents how to do this. I can tell you about the head cameras. It's pretty easy to do. There's a few simple rules: light, only one thing to turn on and off, and that records, and a recorder and an SD card. And there's lots of options to do that. And then you get all your data. And so parents do it in the home, and we have collected a large amount of data in Bloomington, Indiana, from infants from about 2 weeks of age up to about 30 months. And we have collected a data set, a parallel data set in a under-resourced village outside Chennai in India. And I will talk a little bit about that data today. All right, so this is what we do. So let's first talk about word learning to vision to self-generate experience. And these are somewhat older studies now. But children begin acquiring words early and rapidly from individual sessions. And really, there's very little understanding how it works. And most experimental studies trying to look at early word learning by putting pictures on a screen have not gotten much out of showing that babies actually can learn, but somehow in everyday life, they manage to. So we did these experiments in which we brought moms and babies, 18-month-olds, into the laboratory. Everybody's wired up. We got head-mounted eye trackers and motion sensors and on the head in this picture here. And we have the child and parent play with novel objects that we've made, three-dimensional things with novel names, and the mom is taught the names ahead. They play with these objects and for about 6 minutes, okay? And then at the end, we do a word learning test, okay? We we've done this 3 times, and one time we used looking, and 2 other times we used their ability to grab the objects. The results are all very similar. So at the end, as being shown here, we'd have 3 objects on the tray. We'd push one forward and we'd say something like, get the tima. Okay. Can you get the tima? Get the tima. Okay. All right. So that's a method. And then what are we doing with this? Okay. What we do is we take the words objects, names that the baby learned, and we put them into 2 groups. Those that the baby learned, that is, we actually make them be 100% correct. If they're 100% correct on the multiple trials of testing, we say the baby learned it. Other ways, we say the baby did not learn it. We just make a big split, okay? So we're looking at words the baby has learned, object names they've learned, in the sense that they can pick the referent reliably at test, versus they did not learn. Okay? And then we take those 2 classes and we go in and we look at what the information was from the baby's point of view when the object was named in the multiple times, okay? All right, so here's the basic result. What I'm going to show you here are visual properties on the y-axis. This is when the parent named the object. That's a little blurry utterance. I don't know why it's blurry, but it's blurry. And then we look at the properties from 10 seconds prior to the naming event till 10 seconds after, okay? And what we find, and again, this has now been found repeatedly, replicated by us and multiple people many times, is that there is a real visual signature to when object names are learned. Object names are learned when the named object is bigger in the image projected to the eye, that is in the head camera image, than are the competitors, okay? The named object is learned when on average it is more centered or more distant in the image from those go together, right? More centered or more distant in the image from the competitors. And we have a number of analyses about these, which I won't go into here because I want to get to other things. The duration of these advantages is long, okay? These are not brief moments. It's not like at the naming moment they're distant. No, they're distant before and after. It's much bigger than the competitors before and after, okay? Long. These are reliable differences that run out to 7 seconds here, 7 seconds in duration. All of this, we now know, is a direct consequence of the toddler's body, of the 18-month-old body, and how their sensory motor system works, how they interact with the world. We know a lot about this, and I want to get to the newer stuff, so I just want to, we know that head stability is really critical. They're going to learn, successful means they learned. They're going to learn an object name in these kinds of experiments if they keep their head stable, okay? They don't move it during that critical period around the naming event. We know that they're more likely to learn it even when the visual information looks very similar if they're holding it than if the parent is holding it. Their own holding helps. Now, why does their own holding help? Because holding an object at midline stabilizes the head. These are actually the same thing, okay? We also know they're more likely to learn it when the heads and eyes are aligned, when the image is closer to the center of the head camera image, okay? When they're, you don't learn things when you've got your eyeballs looking off in a peripheral direction, okay? So when it's more centered, sort of within that 20-degree center of the head image, they're more likely to learn it when it's not, okay? So what all this suggests is that the toddlers are controlling their bodies, are doing things with their bodies that actually controls the quality of the input. And this matters for whether they learn from that visual auditory experience. Now, here I want to just go into a little more detail about one experiment, because I think it illustrates how potentially transformative it is to think about these things. So we know that visual size is a potent salience. These are on-screen tasks, right? That attract gaze and attention for adults, for children. Okay. So here is an experiment in which the same as before, we have the child and parent playing with objects. But what I'm showing you here is the range of variability in the visual size of the objects during play. Okay. So here's the relative. So we're gonna measure visual size in two ways: absolute size, degrees, and relative size, which is the proportion of all the object pixels that belongs to an individual object. Each one of these objects, I don't know, there's something like 300,000. Each one of these dots is a moment, okay? Something like 300,000 or so of them here, okay? And what you can see is that the range, sometimes there's a single object in view. They create moments where there's only one of these objects. There's always objects on the table, but only one is in the child's view. It's 100% of all the object pixels. And the absolute size of the objects in view, can vary from very little, close to 0, on up to, being 15 degrees. Okay, that's the object. This is the data of everyday vision. Okay? It's nothing like the data in an experiment that people use to study vision. But this is the everyday experience. Now I've hung out here the object that is the largest in the image and make those blue, and the grays are all the other objects. So this ball here like thing would be one of the blue dots because it's big, and that thing over there would be one of the gray dots because it's not the biggest. Okay. So this is the everyday experience. Okay. Now what is okay now? The next thing I want to talk about, this is moving over a little more to cognitive development, but sustained attention in toddlers. That is looking at a single object during active play, active vision, for 3 seconds or longer is an early measure of executive function. Many people think that it is part of the pathway to building the circuitry for controlling one's own attention. And it's really critical to toddler visual and word learning. It's a it's a densely studied issue, an area of much interest in developmental science, because it does appear, many people view this, what's happening here with sustained attention early, is part of the both critical predictor for later, like a biomarker for later executive development, and also Dina Amsu in particular, it's also the training ground, perhaps, through which the circuitry gets built for what we think of as adult-like executive function. So sustained attention is standardly defined in the field, kind of arbitrarily, but there we go, as this region on the long tail of gaze. Most gaze is jumping around a little bit here, there, whatever, rapid. But sometimes I stay on a single object. Gaze stays on a single object over 3 seconds. I'm going to skip the distribution properties here because that's not relevant, but it is relevant if you want to understand it, but not perhaps this. But here's the point that I want to make. What toddlers are doing to sustain attention, okay? They sustain attention. I'm only looking at the long looks now, greater than 3 seconds. They sustain attention by moving their head. They move it closer. They shift the vantage point to make the object larger in their view, okay? And they do that at the onset of the look. This is joint with the look. It's not before the look. It's not after the look. It is with the look. Moving your eyes for a young child means moving those eyes, looking. Directing gaze to an object means moving your head closer to the object. This is a 3D world move, okay? Let me make it closer. Let me bend so the cup is no longer standing in the way of what I want to look at, okay? And then they still the head. So this is the head movements here. Look onset goes right with the gaze. And then they still the head. They bring it down to a low level while they're looking at the object. Now, this does not mean that they're looking at the object like a picture. Nope. They're stilling the head. They got their eyes on the object, but the object is moving, okay? They're often handling it. They're often doing things with it in front of their face. Or they're pounding a giraffe with a hammer, okay? So it's not that the visual input is stationary, okay? But they are maintaining the size, both the relative size and the absolute size, by stilling the head, and the body moves with the eyes, okay, when they look. That's what visual attention is in an 18-month-old. So what we've got here, right, is we've got a closed loop control system, right? These kiddos are optimizing the visual information. They're inhibiting the distractors, how much some other object can distract what they're looking at, by changing the input itself in real time, in one move, okay? And as I said, the growing idea among many people not yet shown is that this external inhibition, reaching out to the world to control distractors, may actually be the training for the internal circuitry that later becomes internal inhibition and control. All right. The other thing is, so we have begun to think about this optimizing the visual information, is that what people do, and it's just really obvious in young children, toddlers, is it's the make it easier to see principle, okay? They just organize what they do with their body when they're visually attending by make it easier to see. And we have really hints in the work going on now that this principle might extend very far and dip down into really the low level statistics of visual experience. So this is a 10 to 12-month-old children playing with toys, and in a more naturalistic thing than the wired up head mounted eye tracker and motion sensor context. But what you see is that they are really organizing the contrast, the information, into the center. This is just summed up over, I don't know, 60,000 images, but it's into the center. Okay. So just how far might this principle of make it easier to see all the way down to the simple statistics go? Really the foundation for everything they want to learn. All right. So that's where we're going to go now. We're going to go to a curriculum of visual experience. And I, again, want to set the tone up to how I've been in experimental psychology a long time, and how done a lot of experiments, and how this is sort of changing the whole way I think about everything. So in the experiments that I used to do, what you do is you'd have hypotheses. You would create some data, babies on a screen, okay? Be discrete trials. You get the timing right, how many seconds, portions of seconds you're going to present it. You'd send that all to a baby, and you'd measure their learning or their attention in some specific task. Now, if you look what's happening in AI and computer vision, what do? We go in with assumptions. Also in the people who do scene statistics, not to pick on anybody, you go in with assumptions that assume that the world presents at the scale of everyday life. Low-level visual statistics are the same for everybody, okay? And then so you just, grab a whole bunch of photographs and you put them into some model, some computational model, and you look at the result and what can be concluded from that. Okay? But the everyday learning of infants is not like that. You have the infant's own view, which is created moment by moment, and their own behavior influences it. So it's the infant encountered data that matters, not everything possible in the world. And infants who are doing the learning they don't know that they're learning, they're not out there to tune V1, and they're not out there to learn faces. They're just continuously learning about what's ever out there, okay? And all of this is influenced in time by what their posture is, what their location is, where they're put, and then what they do themselves. And what this gives rise to is developmentally changing data sets for vision with very different properties, okay? Now, when we first started, okay, I just want to give you, so this is from the, we have two home views now. This is the original home view, but in Bloomington. I'm going to show you a video. It was made by Jason Gold to put all the things together. And you can forget what we call sparse and what we can call ordinary. I can tell you about those later, perhaps. But if you just look at the 0 to 3 month olds, what are you seeing? You're seeing walls and ceilings and windows and faces, 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 walls and ceilings and windows and faces, faces, faces. When you look at the 6 to 8 month olds, you see scenes from a distance because these kids can sit, but they fall over. They're not good with their hands, although they're trying a little bit. And you see a lot of floor. Why do you see a lot of floor? They're crawling. Okay. All right. Now, when you look at the 11 to 12 month olds, these start getting a little more like what you might think of people doing, right? Because now they're handling objects, they can move about, they look at the world standing up. All right. So anyway, these are the data in a very rapid view. One of the first things we did, the first paper we actually published out of the home view corpus was on faces and hands. This has also now been replicated a lot of time, and there's lots of interesting things to say here, but I'm going to move to low-level visual statistics. I just want to tell you where we've been. And what you would see is that each dot is an individual infant. They're at a different age. And you can see that the frequency of faces declines very steadily as you get older, up over 24 months. And the frequency of hands increases, okay? At this point in early development, hands are in view about 15 minutes out of every waking hour, okay? Whoa, okay. 15 minutes out of every waking hour. Down here, when you get, this is the 18-month gap. We now have solved the problem of getting 18-month-olds to wear head cameras, so we have filled this gap. But in the first paper, we hadn't. Whoops, where am I? Right. Hands, by the time you get to 24, 30 months, but beginning much earlier by 18 months, hands constitute about 18 minutes out of every hour. Now, this is really interesting, right? Everybody studies faces. Probably in terms of our visual experiences, hands are the things we see most. They're everywhere. Every time we do something. Every time somebody else gives us something, right? We got hands, okay? All right. So the contents of visual experience change from being very dense with faces early on, under, let's say, 4 months of age, we'll make it broad, to being very dense with hands. And these hands are not waving in the air. These are hands on objects, hands doing instrumental acts, starting from about 12 months on. Okay. Really different semantic content here. The early period is the developmental niche for learning about faces. And that period from 12 months to 24 months is all about objects, okay? And what you can do with objects. So we have spent a lot of time looking at what hands do for objects. And it really is a special period in the development of object constancy and robust visual object recognition. As I've said, when they are stabilizing their head and looking at an object, they're often moving it and manipulating it, and they create, little views of an object in time. This is a rendered of one child's looking at an object, okay? And when you take that one look and you ask, what views are they showing themselves? It's highly structured, okay? That's what I'm showing over here. It's highly structured in that the hot spots are around the planar views, where you have the axis of elongation or the axis of symmetry, perpendicular to the line of sight, or parallel to the line of sight. Those are the dwell spots where they slow down, okay? The other thing they do is they rotate them in depth, okay? No, babies don't ever do this. This is what parents do when they show babies things. Babies do this, okay? These are the hot spots for the 1-year-olds in this did not make as hot a hot spot as 2.5-year-olds, but they're there, okay? Just a little sloppier. Now, one of the things you could hypothesize is that the hands are playing this role. We certainly thought that the case. I'm like an active vision person, right? That the hands are constraining, which you can see, but that is not true. We put, when we put the toys in plexiglass spheres and let babies show themselves views, we can turn 1-year-olds into 2.5-year-olds in terms of the hot spots. The hands get in the way, okay? The hands, if the 1-year-old's hands stop them from looking at these the way they want to look at them. They prefer to look at the same dwell spots on the planar views and changes along the and changes in depth. Okay. The point is, there's a lot of structure here, a lot of information that is unstudied. We don't even really know much about it at all. Okay. All right. So. All right, let me go to the next one. There we go. We also know, just to sum up where we are here on the object period, that self-generated variability in object images predicts vocabulary growth, predicts how they generalize object names, and new results that I'm just analyzing now, predicts how well they can recognize objects in hard visual contexts, bad lighting, blur. So a lot of variable experience with single objects plays a big role, I think, in solving object constancy problems and building a way to represent the structure of an individual object in 3 dimensions. All right. All right, so we have these developmentally changing data sets. Oh, this was to remind me to say, I want to tell you more about 1 to 3 month olds. I forgot what I put in here. So I mentioned they got a lot of faces. They have a lot of other images that you hardly ever see in older children's views from home. These kind of simple views. And some of them are pretty dramatic, okay? For children under 3 months of age, you have simple views of door, windows, edges, lights, stuff that looks like Gabor filters for about 15 minutes out of every hour, okay? So these babies got 15 minutes out of every hour, it's a face, and 15 minutes out of every hour is a simple edge. Who knew? So let me tell you what we did, okay? We took images, and I'm going to tell you about 25 images for 1 to 3 month olds and from the home view, and 25,000 images from 18 to 71-year-olds. I'm not 71-year-old. There you go. Like my head camera in the home. Okay. And we measured the following properties. We measured edge sparsity. We used an algorithm that's commonly used for how many edges, how many pixels go to how many edges. And we then measured the orientation consistency of those edges. Are they mostly in one or many orientations? Measured RMS contrast and the amplitude by spatial frequency slope. When you look at these, when you look at these individual properties, each of the individual measures, this is what they are for the young infants, this is what they are for the adults. Those distributions don't differ, but of course the distributions of the individual measures are not what matters. What matters are their joint properties, because it's their joint properties in a single image which are going to determine the neural response. So what we did is we built a PCA space to show the joint properties. We put RMS contrast, we used PCA to make 1 dimension out of RMS contrast and amplitude by spatial frequency slope. Okay, we're going to call that edge visibility. And then we used PCA to put edge sparsity, and orientation consistency together. We're going to call that edge simplicity. Okay, so few edges all in one direction. You can see them because you got contrast is high. Okay, all right. That's all we're doing there, all right? But that means we get a two-dimensional space where we can present all the images. Each one of these little dots are all the images, okay? And so what we did was actually we did the PCA arrangement, and then we did two additional independent analyses of the objects in those space so that we could make sure our space was reasonable. So what we're doing here is we take the median value of edge sparsity, edge consistency, RMS contrast for the infant, and we ask for each image, this image right here, how many of the 4 properties was above the infant median, okay? That's just how many joint properties are going together. So 11% have 4, okay, of the properties. Some of them have 0 of the properties above the median for each of the measures, okay? And then we use the infant median and we ask how many of the adult images, okay, have 4 of those measured properties above their median value in the infant set, okay? You know, like this guy might have 4, okay? The second thing we did is we did a K cluster analysis to look at the space, just bottom-up classifier. It reliably, multiple ways of doing it, multiple seeds gave us 3 clusters, okay? They're shown here. Because the first cluster, the orange, is really extreme on the edge simplicity, as we call this, simple edges. This is, we call complex, it's sort of here in the middle. And then we have the bottom ones here that have lot of edges and very little visibility, and they're basically textures, okay? And so if we look at these things here, okay, roughly 15 minutes out of every hour, okay? These percentages, frames are time, so you can do this, right? You know, this is, we have here that we have here that 64% has 2 or more properties, okay? So that's a lot of properties. About, you know, you're getting down to over 15 minutes an hour have 3 to 4 properties. Adults, their dominant image only has 1 of these properties that has a high level sparsity, consistency, or whatever. They're only 1 or more, okay? Anyway, this comes out to 14 minutes an hour. The simple clusters for babies, 48 minutes an hour. This region here just asks what's in this upper corner of the PCA space. So it's high in both visibility and high in simplicity. That's 16 minutes an hour for the babies, okay? The point is that the input is extremely biased. Now, this is the input to the eyeball, okay? This is like what's coming from the world, okay? It's just like what arrives at the eye, what arrives at the head camera, okay? And there are simple images. They have simple big edges, okay? I mean, one of the questions you might want to ask is whether this initial experience, you know, these things that look like a lot like Gabor filters, is somehow good, good for organizing visual systems. And we have a work that we're doing with computer vision folks. We've just submitted it to NeurIPS, and where we ask whether if you trained, why am I doing that? If you train a self-supervised CNN, convolutional neural network, with the young baby's images in curriculum order, so that the network gets these kind of images, then it gets these kind of images, then it gets these kind of images, okay? Does it do better than if you just randomly sample across all the different images, or if you do them in the opposite order, you know, so maybe you get the oldest kids and then the next and the youngest babies. And the answer, of course, this is why it goes to NeurIPS, is that it is better to do it for for a self-supervised neural network in the right developmental order. So this is the loss function. You want the loss function in these models to fall fast, okay? And the developmental order, the young baby images, the middle baby images, the older baby images goes down where fast. The anti-developmental is when you do it backwards, is way up here, even worse than adults. The adult data is horrible. Good thing we did it young, right? And random is in the middle, okay? And the same thing, this is the loss function, this is the accuracy when you test at different points, and it's basically the same result. The developmental order is better for accuracy, right? We think that key factors in this are the simple edges and the fact of slow change. So this is I think a very interesting result next is we measured the pixel to pixel. Well, we measured different kinds of similarity. We measured the similarity of one image to the next at multiple lags, a lag of successive images, longer. Time goes this way for 2 to 4 month old images, for 6 to 8 month old images, and for 10 to 12 month old images. And we did it at 3 levels. We measured similarity in terms of the raw pixels, just pixel to pixel similarity. It's just what's in the images that comes out of the camera. I don't know why I keep surreptitiously hitting the advance. We measured edge features using GIST transform, and we measured semantic features. These are the last level of features before actually classifying objects out of a before the system tells you that it's a face or a truck or a car. This is that level right before the last set of features before it makes a decision. We're calling it the semantic level, so the semantic distance. All right. Okay, so we're going to look at self-similarity by autocorrelation. And what you can see here is that autocorrelation settles to its minimum value much faster in the older groups, the 6 to 8. These are these guys, much faster. And this is easier to see when you actually measure the time constant. So if you measure the median time constant of the oral correlation, first of all, you see for 6 to 8 month olds and 10 to 12 month olds, sort of what you'd expect, in that the raw and the feature, the edge level, they're fast, okay? Whereas the semantic level is slower. Semantic similarity maintains itself over lots of varying sensory input. That's what your visual system is supposed to do. You can say there's a face there, even though it's moving around or you're moving around or the light flickers, okay? So this looks just like what you expect. But look at this. The little babies, they don't change at all. They are so slow. And it's all determined by the raw pixels, okay? I mean, these can't go fast if that is not moving. If it's almost like looking at a still picture, right? It's very, very slow. Okay. It's about the very young infants' behavior or lack of behavior, okay? that they look for very, very long times. This has got to be important. There's a lot we need to know. All right, so now I finished the middle section. I'm coming close to the end. I'm just going to do the trailer for the cross-cultural work, okay? So this says to me, okay, and it's where I am now, and I know other people don't have to do it, there's lots to know. I'm going to live over here. I'm going to live within egocentric vision and within self-generated sensory motor behavior, because I'm not sure this is right. I'll come back to that, okay? But because of this, because babies' bodies change, because their brains change, now their behavior helps change those brains, this is not a constant. The visual world that's out there isn't the same for everybody, okay? And in fact, with development, you get highly structured, constrained curriculum of different classes of experiences at different points in time, which may also be critical to understanding sensitive periods in vision, that it may not just be about the internal plasticity, but about the kind of stimuli that can open and close plasticity, the gates on plasticity, or that is what the specifically needed to solve some particular learning task. All right. So now geography, culture, and context. We are, we finished collecting data in under-resourced fishing village just outside Chennai. And we chose this region, both because I did language studies in Tamil there early, since I'm a language person, but because of the real differences in kind of geography and properties of the region. So Bloomington, Indiana has a little over 1,000 people per square kilometer. In Chennai and where this fishing village is, it is much denser, okay? There are on average 4.5 people in a house. We got 2.2, okay? Little houses, bigger houses. Electricity, well, in the fishing village, there's some places have electricity, some houses, but most do not. And if they do, it is stolen. You know, it's like pulled off the wires from and connected to their house. Okay. So it's intermittent. Okay. Whereas I think everybody in Bloomington has electricity. All right. All right. So we put head cameras on the kids. We use these kind because they're really easy to use for the folks over there. There's issues with that, but I can talk about it. Okay. And first of all, you see real differences in the amount of lighting. This is why we wear glasses and they don't. So, you know, they because electricity is not always on, they have real night-day cycles. When the sun goes down, it gets dark. Okay. Whereas in Bloomington, we can always turn the lights on. Okay. So first of all, that's one big backdrop. They show the same proportion of faces developmental trend. Okay, they got a few more because it's more crowded. Okay, but basically the developmental trend of declining with age is pretty similar. And then here's what's interesting. So I'm doing the same low-level measures that we did in the first study, and edge visibility, the RMS contrast and the slope, and edge simplicity here, number of edges and their consistency, single orientation. And what you can see is that they're really very, 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 very similar, okay? In that you have all these simple edges and their frequencies declining, okay? And you have differences in visibility. That babies in India had many, many more low visible images. That's because the lights are off a lot. I just want to say, okay. But basically, you see the same big preference for edge simplicity that declines with increasing age. We also looked at where the faces were in these images. There are not more faces in the US. That is, the gold dots are on top of the gray dots in a way that's different. It's hard to see the density measures in this, but you can see that for young babies, the faces are all in the high visibility area, okay? Not necessarily the simplicity area, but all in the high visibility area, okay? And this is an error, okay? That is not exactly what that looks like. It looks more like that. All right. We're currently looking at the edges. So we know for the US babies at the edges are lights, walls, ceilings, doorways. We're doing the same for the India babies at the moment, and the only difference is that the edges, the Gabor filters for the young India babies are going to often be outdoors and be silhouettes of trees or people's bodies against the very bright sky. Okay, and they spend a lot of time looking at those edges. All right, so what I want to conclude, moving to the conclusion here, is that there's a developmentally ordered curriculum of different kinds of visual experiences that emerge because of the changing behavior and motor abilities and interests. And so the infant plays a direct role in creating their own experiences. And those experiences create different statistics at different points in time. And I think that much of what we've done in those experiments in our past, right, is we take the brain and we drive it, and then we measure its output, okay? We drive the input in, okay? So we get very precise, clean measures. But even though that may reveal important and generalizable component aspects about the neural circuitry, it may be missing the larger story of how at every moment we are doing something that creates experiences that come back in and help create experiences and come back in, and that this is what is building both structural and functional connectivity over development. And really that cycle's what we got to understand, okay? All right, so where I was, okay? It's all the brain, the behavior, the input. It's all interdependent. And of course, I'm only doing one little bit of it, but what really needs to be done is to do all of it together. All right, so I want to thank my amazing lab members and all the financial support. And I want to note to anybody out there who's mildly interested that we are looking for postdocs, multiple. And if you just send me an email, I'll tell you how to go after it. Okay, and we have funding for both. We have funding for non-US citizens as well as citizens. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Linda. It was an amazing talk, and I want to ask everybody to unmute yourself, and let's give Linda a big applause. And of course, I want to open the stage for question. I will just start with a short question of, the idea of neural recycling that Kalanit in Grill Spector's lab found, recycling basically limbs to faces at the age where people start to read. And I wonder if you think maybe there's actually two, so are these the same processes or locations that process faces, then they move to hands, then they move to text? Just a question. Just an idea, but
you're talking about the motor side of what the baby moves, or what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the information that is eventually transforming into being selective to text and visual cortex.
Oh, in the brain. Okay. In the brain.
Yeah, in the brain. In the brain. But I mean, that's for you don't have. It's just an idea, but it has to be investigated. I'm just thinking that if we see it as being recycled at the age of 5, 6, maybe it's already recycled from faces.
Right, to letters and those kinds of things, yes. So there's some really, I think of Akara's work here, actually. There are some really different aspects about faces and hands in the first person view that might be relevant, okay? And so faces, particularly for young babies, tend to be centered while they're kind of at the bottom of the screen, okay, because they're looking up, okay, but the bottom of their field of view, but they're definitely at midline, okay, they tend to be at midline, and they're large, have both eyes in view, okay. All right, so the statistics of that are very centered and simple statistics. We want to go after the simple statistics of faces very deeply, and we haven't quite pulled that all together. Just made our first foray, but that's that. Okay. Now I know much more about hands and objects because that's where my way in, right? So these two computer vision people, Fathi and Jimray at Georgia Tech, did this really interesting study that I think captures this point, that they wanted to see whether they could just use head cameras to predict gaze. So you did not have to use head-mounted eye trackers. And they're able to. Now, these are with adults, but they were able to. They got 96% accuracy.
Wow.
How did they do it? Okay. Here's how they did it. If you just guess that where they're looking is in the center of the first person visual field, you get like 90% correct. Okay. So then you just need to clean that up a bit. So their algorithm cleans that up a bit by moving gaze toward any hand in view, not all the way. Okay. So if I'm holding a cup, you want to look at the cup, not my hands. So you just move the gaze slightly in the direction of the hand. And if there's two hands, you move the gaze a little bit off center in the direction of between the two hands. Okay. So hands are, I think, they're the surround. They're like flankers. Okay. And so I don't think their the low level visual properties here are going to be the same. The hands themselves are mostly about telling you where to look to find objects or things of interest. That's my hunch.
Thank you. Thank you. Jeremy?
So that was fascinating. I was wondering whether or not you think of this as of your current work as sort of a revival of a form of radical empiricism.
No.
Okay. Would you care to say a word about that?
Okay, James Gibson, I'm not. I actually believe in the brain. I believe in internal circuitries. What's happening in the brain is driving, and it comes with constraints and circuits and heterogeneities and connections, and it is driving the behavior, okay? So why are little babies, okay, the little ones, why do they like to look at Gabor filters, okay? Well, it's actually because evolution has chosen to make the front end properties of young babies so crappy, that's all they can see, okay? So it's not radical empiricism. People accuse me of that because I'm really interested in experience and the structure of statistics of experience, but it is not radical empiricism at all.
So do you have a notion of what sort of constraints are built in to the visual system structure? For instance, do you think that there is a face box that comes with the system that then gets fed?
Oh, no, I wasn't going that far. Okay.
Okay.
But there are all kinds of things, you know, that the fact that human babies have their motor systems development way slowed down. Okay. Horses, whatever, they come out, they run around, they can see, they run around, they're perfectly, you know, capable of moving autonomously. Ours, and other primates, is deeply slowed down. Babies spend their first 3 months primarily watching, okay, and listening, okay. That is not an accident, right? That's what evolution's constrain the order in which you build this brain up, okay? Now, does that come down to some high-level thing that says faces go here? Maybe, but somebody's got to tell me what that circuitry is, and I'm sure it does not have the word face written on it, okay? But I wouldn't be shocked if there's, look at, if you know, like when I think about Akaro's work, it's whatever's in the front of the, whatever's centered and dominant. These babies are getting 15 minutes of every hour. This isn't all that far off from thinking about imprinting in geese, okay? It is It's a lot of faces, okay?
About
Galit,
contrast, you seem to suggest contrast is a big driver.
sorry, Ellie, Galit is in line.
Okay,
You can
go
raise
ahead.
your hand. Thank you.
Mhm.
Galit?
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you, Linda, for really inspiring work and talk. I wish I could apply for this postdoc position. So I'm wondering about the link between the period of time where they're actually passive, like the first 4 or 5 more months, and the fact and like perceptual narrowing, which takes place during that time, which is really important and has important consequences for their future visual abilities. But this is during the time they're really passive. So can you link between those two?
So they're not as they are passive. So they are where people put them down. They're where people hold them, but they do control what they look at, and they control their head movements. Okay, so with actually Kate Bonin, who some of you may know, we are looking at those early movements of so when what you'll see a light in the series, over in the corner of a darkish room. And if you wait like 45 seconds, they really look long at things, okay? Because they're like sitting there in their little seat, right? But as you look, slowly, 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 this will come to the light bar will come to the center. They are slowly moving their heads to center it. The other thing that I think is a factor is I think that their contentment, right? So we actually believe, and I don't know whether we can get it out of these data or not, but we can try, that parents leave them alone when they're contented, and they're contented when they have a big edge with high contrast in view, and they just stay there. They love ceiling fans, okay? And I think they're contented, whereas when they can't see anything and it's too much clutter going on, they're less contented. Parents may not logically know that, although most parents know they like ceiling fans, slow moving ceiling fans. So I think that it is behavior. That is behavior. If you're not fussing, it's behavior. But they are, because it is what's coming in is biased, they must be influencing it, okay, in one way or another, okay? That we have to work all that out, but it is behavior.
Okay.
Lovely. I see Udi, just a second. I mean, Ellie, I think may have wanted to ask something. Ellie, do you want to ask something, or shall Udi?
I'll give Udi the chance. Go ahead, Udi.
Okay.
Linda, just one question. I think one issue that you didn't refer to is the effect of image blur at very young age, and so first thing, I think just a suggestion, it would be useful to show what the images are.
Okay, you want to see? I could show you.
Yeah,
This
and
is
I was just
this is in the
wondering,
paper.
because image blur would have an effect on edge visibility, on simplicity. It would also have an effect, and you would understand why the baby is moving forward. So you know.
I think when I talk about the the front end processes that limit what we can call acuity, it's a driving force for what babies look at. They look at what they can see. However, some people think about this process as a filter, okay? And I want to show you it's not much of a filter because it's already too biased. It's playing its role through behavior. Give me just a minute. I'm going to get that for you.
Sure.
All right. All right. We take the images, you can see here, and we filter them. okay? So and here's the same space that I told you about, and the filter does not change simplicity, edge simplicity all that much. It does change visibility. It makes everything less visible, okay? But here is the pre-space, okay? For the pre-space, what arrives at the eye. Here's what arrives at the cortex. You can think if the front end immaturities are filtering by putting a low pass filter on it all, right? And the differences, of course it does something, but the differences are not great. The power of the front end immaturities are in controlling what's in front of the eye, not what, it's not that the eye for young babies, which people like Mike Tarr and others have suggested, is a random sample of the world, and then it gets cleaned up and simplified by the by this low pass filter of the poor front end, right? It is instead that the poorer acuity is driving the infant behavior. They will look and look longer to what they can see. Yeah. We're hoping to put this paper out shortly.
Linda, I've
Lovely.
lost my hand.
Jan? Yes. So, yeah,
Okay.
Ellie, I hope that's
can't
okay.
find the
Yes.
hand. Can I say something that kind of agrees with Ellie, that there is a change in contrast sensitivity, but you have to remember that babies are looking at these images where their contrast sensitivity is well able to cope with it, particularly in the first 3 months. If you've got a spatial frequency that's giving you an acuity that's already at about 1 cycle per degree, and you've got these fairly big objects and you're still moving towards them, you've got lots of contrast in those images in terms of the low spatial frequency.
Yes, exactly.
And you don't need the edges. So in fact, when you look at Gabor patterns and things, yes, they may be a bit blurry, but the fundamental frequency is well within the infant's view. The thing that I puzzle about is we did a lot of experiments on what babies reached for and what babies looked at in the first 9 months of life. And we had a big object versus a small object, and then we swapped it around and that kind of thing so that we controlled for any handiness biases. And what we found was that younger infants have a relatively static view and don't move their eyes so much, and they went for contrast. Didn't matter what you showed them, they went for contrast, which was usually in the edge of things, like stripe patterns and things, but it was low spatial frequencies. If you went for objects and one of the objects was graspable by the infant at about 6 to 7 months, then they went for the smaller object. And if you had a great big object that was still within their frame of view, then actually what they did was feel around the edges of it.
Right.
Because they could see the edges, and they knew that perhaps if they use 2 hands, by the time they get to 11 months or 10 months, they can probably try to lift it or do something with it or tap it or something like that. So it's kind of slightly fits in with your story.
It's exactly the story, okay?
Yeah.
So,
But it may be about the motor system, if you like, which is what you're saying, and the eye movement system being advanced on the hand movement system.
yes,
Because it's better controlled.
I think it is. First of all, I don't tend to think of the eye movement system as separate from the motor system, okay?
No, I don't either.
This-
That's why I'm saying it's all part of the motor system.
It's all part of it.
It's a hand-eye system
Yeah.
that isn't coordinated till about 3 months.
Oh, hand-eye, yes. Hand-eye is not even coordinated at 3 months. Hand-eye is still a mess at 9 months, okay?
Well, it's a mess, but it's better than it is at 1 to 4 months.
But hand-eye, I mean, people always say these things, well, hand-eye is done like by 6 months of reaching, but the hand, because I care very much about objects and what you know about objects, what you know about what objects can do, about learning the names of objects, and about the visual experiences of objects. Hand actions on objects, they you know, you start reaching, grabbing for stuff, eyeglasses off people's heads or whatever on 5 months. But your ability to manipulate objects at 9 months is still terrible. Okay.
Well, that's what I've already said. I said when you get big objects, they can't manipulate them. When you give them a very small object that's just hand grippable, then they actually, you know, right size for the hand, then they go for that one at around 7-8 months.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm agreeing with you.
Yes. No. And they also go for the closer object. They don't
Yeah.
reach for objects I can't get, not at 8 months. They don't.
But interestingly, a face on a rattle still wins against a face, a little drawing of a face on a rattle still wins against a plain rattle, even all the way through the age group when they can actually reach for it. You know, so there's something about those high contrast edges in faces, which is all there is on these little rattles, that actually wins, even though they can reach for both of them.
Right.
They make a tinkly noise when you know, get them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's in agreement. You're muted.
Thank you. Ellie, did you want to have a go?
Well, I was just pointing to the contrast, and I think some of the data that was presented by Linda was showing that contrast is really a big driver. So this has already been discussed here, and I generally think that contrast is king in vision. So.
Okay, lovely. Danny, just a minute. I just want to say that Georgia Zapalati says really interesting talk. Thank you very so much. Ruti Kimchi says fantastic talk. Thank you very much. And Jeremy says many thanks, gotta go. And are you okay to take another question from Danny?
I am.
Yeah. Okay, so Danny, you're most welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Linda, for the very interesting talk. I always like to hear you talk about developmental studies. I was wondering regarding the goal of the infants when they handle objects at the later age beyond 1 year old, because it seems like they already gain a lot of visual experience in the first 9 months before they actually have interactions, physical interactions with objects. So they already get quite a big experience just by observing stuff in their environment, following the curriculum that you mentioned. So when they actually interact with the objects, do you think that they are not really exploring new stuff about object, but maybe they are searching for discriminative characteristics of the objects in order to identify them, discriminate them from other objects, or maybe learn about their affordances in relation to the interaction with them, with their hands, etc. So how, again, if I rephrase the question again, do you think that the interaction is actually about visual learning, or is it about learning about discrimination in the visual space?
Okay, I think it's about visual learning, and I think it's not about discrimination. I think the idea that human intelligence systems are primarily out there to discriminate. Is it a dog, or is it a goat? Is it a vase, or is it a glass? It's got the whole wrong idea. And that's one reason why AI is in the trouble that it's in. But babies, I don't think are doing that at all. So I actually think, and one of my grants, which I didn't talk about today, but is related to some of the object work, is based on the premise that individual experiences with objects, experiences with individual objects, extended experiences with individual objects, your own sippy cup, your own teddy bear that you sleep with, your own shoes, that they are the solution to visual constancy. And the visual solution, because what all those highly varied things that can show up projected from an object in the world, all those varied things, okay? What constrains them, the lighting changes, the occlusion, the different views, the whatever, okay? All of that is based on the geometry of the object, which is basically shape. So that solving the problem of visual constancy actually leads to the ability to recognize objects in hard visual contexts, in a lot of clutter, partially occluded as a shadow, okay? Upside down in odd places, all the things that foul up current computer vision. Okay. And so the idea is that solving object constancy is what actually gives you object categorization. And it doesn't come because you discriminate cups from glasses or cups from bowls, but because you learn what the abstract properties of your sippy cup are that enable you to find it anywhere, okay, from even just a piece of it, and that those properties will generalize to shape similar things because they are just shape similar, okay? And that is actually ends up being the foundation of category generalization. And my work, the other work I could give another talk on object name learning, strongly suggests that infants and children solve the visual categorization problem, and that it's what enables object name learning. And they need to solve it by 12 months because they're learning object names pretty well by then, okay? And so that's I think it's visual. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't think it's about labels directing you or learning discriminations. I think it's visual learning that sets this all up.
Thank you.
Could be wrong. I'm going for it.
Linda, I want to thank you again for lovely, very exciting, pioneering research and talk, and really thank you for joining us. Again, big applaud for the wonderful talk. And I just want to say next week we will have Rachel Pearson here with us at the same time, and I hope that we will also make this talk available. I'm sure that many people will find it really interesting. So thanks again for joining us and sharing your wonderful research with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And I know I'm a person with very strong opinions, but I can't stop it now. And I really enjoyed myself. I think a lot of these questions are pushing me, even though I push back. They will push me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.